Well, good morning everyone. My name is Reinhold Koch. I live in Kitchener, Ontario, Canada, and I'd like to share something very, very special with you this morning. My family background is connected to the Transylvanian area of Romania, as well as another area north of the Carpathian Mountains called the Bukovina. And a summer delicacy in Central Europe, in those two areas in particular, this delicacy is naturally fermented dill pickles. And I'd like to demonstrate for you this morning how easy it is to make these. These dill pickles were referred to in our household as open crock dill pickles. But I've modernized the situation because I don't have a great big crock lying around in the house, and instead I use gallon jugs like this. Glass gallon jugs, not plastic. And let me start out by saying that it's important to get the right size cucumbers and to get them quite fresh. I find going to a farmer's market is the way to do it. Over the years, I've established contact with one particular supplier. I know that the cucumbers are fresh. But in spite of that, when I get them home, I put them into cold water, and they can sit for whatever amount of time is convenient. And I make sure if there's any residual dirt that is washed off, and then put them into a tray, and I will sort them according to, well, as close as possible according to their length. This is the quantity found in approximately a three-quart basket. So my procedure generally is to do this and look for what is the same length. Not the most exciting part of the process, but a necessary one. So I've now divided the cucumbers into two categories. The one pile that I feel is has cucumbers that are the longest, and then the shorter ones which will be in the second row. So at this point, you take the gallon jug. I have pre-sterilized it with vinegar. I do sterilization of all of the utensils and so on with vinegar, but then rinse thoroughly, because the brine that will be prepared for these has no vinegar whatsoever. It's just water and salt. So at this stage, I find that it's easiest if I have a tilt on the gallon jug, and our family always put a couple of grape leaves at the bottom of the crock, or in this case the jug. I'm not sure exactly what that adds to the final product, but I suspect it may contribute to the crunchiness of the dill pickles.
Where do you get them from?
And I'm lucky enough to live close to the edge of town, and grapevines are growing wild everywhere. Early in the season, there's no problem. Right now, it's the end of the first week in September, and one finds that the leaves have rust on them, or there are some sort of insect deposits on them, so you have to check very carefully. It's not the end of the world if you can't find grape leaves. It'll still work out. So once that's done, it's a question of putting in a certain amount of dill, and I use both the frilly leaves and I also cut in some of the stems. I find there's a fair bit of flavor there. I try to make sure that whatever goes in will lie flat, so that when you put the cucumbers in, they all have an even base. I also include some mature, not fully mature seeds, but fully developed. But here again, I don't want them to take up too much space, so I'll cut a portion of that off. And then when it goes in, it flattens out quite nicely. So I want to make sure I leave enough for the second layer. Well, let me hold that up to show you. Doesn't take a huge quantity of dill, but you'll find that after you've made your first batch, you'll experiment a little bit with the second, and you just keep adapting. So I used to put garlic in the bottom of the jug, but I have found since that once again some of the cucumbers will be sitting on top of the garlic, and you get an irregularity in the top level of that first level of cucumbers. So I now reserve those for the time being. Having the jug on a tilt makes life very, very easy when it comes to stuffing in the cucumbers. And you want to get them in firmly, firmly packed. So what I do generally is alternate the stem end and the blossom end. There again, it's probably a personal preference of what you're doing. I'll just move this out of the way and perhaps turn it that way. Having the jug on a tilt such as that makes this a much, much easier job.
Could you maybe hold up the jar to show where we're at?
So this is just part way through. The important thing to notice is that you're putting the cucumbers in so that they will be vertical. That's a crucial part of the overall process. At this stage, you don't have to fret over the idea of, well, do I have them in firmly enough or not? Because once you get to a certain point, you can just straighten them up a little bit and then see where possibly you can put in another one. So I'll put this one in. And that's making things pretty solid, but not solid enough. It does not hurt to cut a cucumber in half. It's not going to be a spoiled pickle. It'll be every bit as acceptable as the ones that have not been cut. So if I turn this upside down now, you can see that it was not adequately firmly loaded, if I may use that expression. So normally I would not turn it upside down at that point, but for the sake of illustrating what you're trying to avoid. And now I'll show you how to avoid that problem. So now, although it looks perfectly firm, I'm going to assure that it is by cutting one or two cucumbers, and wherever I see a space, I will firmly insert. And half ones can slip in much more easily. So this is the second cucumber that I've cut in half to help guarantee that things are in firmly. So once you have all the cucumbers packed in, you know they're not going to fall out because you've put in those half cut ones. This is the point when I insert the little cut up garlic cloves.
How many?
And the quantity of garlic is completely dependent upon one's family. Our family is very garlic oriented, and it would be disappointing if the taste were not strong and noticeable.
So how many are you putting in this jar?
I have 4, perhaps 5 with a small one, but I cut them in half to expose a greater surface to make sure that the flavors get into the dills. Now there's no danger of the garlic falling out because we're about to put in more dill, after which the second layer of cucumbers will be added. Okay. Once again, I'm also cutting in some stems that are a little thicker. As I said before, I feel that they have quite a strong flavor. And here's a blossom head that has obviously fairly mature seeds. They're not overly mature. Once again, I cut off the hard stem so that what I add doesn't take up much space. So this is what it looks like at this stage. And now I'm going to repeat the process that I had down here, but I'm using the cucumbers that are a little bit shorter. If you do get a glass jug such as this, you want to make sure it's big enough so your hand can go in it comfortably. It's better to get a jug that perhaps doesn't have the same diameter as this one, that's a little higher, because then you have no problem at all worrying about the height of the second layer of cucumbers, because you'd like them to be about 1 inch below the rim. So to get started, once again, I'll set this in this basin so I have a good angle. If I feel that a cucumber is too long, what I just do is cut a little bit off, and that exposed area I put into the jug with the exposed area towards the bottom.
Okay.
So I've continued on with the second layer, again vertical, and once again you want to make sure that they're in very firm. Don't turn things upside down at this stage to check. Just assume that you have to add something to make it firmer. So this time I'm going to do a sort of a 2/3 cucumber, because I see a spot here that looks perfect for it. I see another one, so I'll do another 2/3. I think that'll go in really nicely. Good. Still a little bit of wobble in there, so you want to make sure that you get it under control. So I'm going to use up 1/3.
And why do we want it so firm?
You want it so firm so that no cucumber will come to the surface of the brine, because if it's exposed there for the 8 to 9 days of fermentation, it'll spoil, be soft and mushy. Whereas if it's allowed to ferment beneath the surface of the upper surface of the brine, it'll turn out perfectly. So this is looking pretty solid, but I'm never totally satisfied until I have trouble inserting anything new. Maybe a 1/4 one will go in here. Let's see what happens. It looks like that definitely is not going to work. Not to be dismayed, you can always find something smaller to get it in there. Just checking a couple other places. So here we are now with the 2 layers of vertically placed cucumbers, and that's all there is to it.
And point the opening towards the camera.
So this is what it looks like. If I turn it upside down, lo and behold, nothing falls out. You know you've done a good job. Okay, now we come to an extremely easy portion of the process. I'm going to prepare a brine, and the big question always is, well, what concentration of salt are you going to use? How do I know how much water to use? Very, very simple. You fill this jug with water, and that's the quantity that you need. So I've now filled it up to within a ½ an inch of the rim of the jug, and I'll empty that into another vessel. And for this size jug, my family feels that the perfect brine solution is about 2 to 3 heaping spoonfuls of pickling salt. That's a non-iodized salt, available probably in every reputable supermarket. Just add a dash more. I stir that around until it's well dissolved. Now, one of the things that I have discovered over the years is that between the day that you actually prepare the brine and the overall jug, some of the water will evaporate. And that could lead to the tops of the upper layer of cucumbers being exposed. Not a good thing. So my solution is to say, well, I actually need a little more water than will actually fit into the jug. So I'm going to take about that much.
What's that much?
And this is just a jam jar that I have reserved and kept handy. And because I added more water, I should also add a little bit more salt. But that's not a huge quantity. So,
are you using cold water or hot water?
And this is done with cold water. There is no heating, there is no vinegar, I stress that. There is no vinegar involved other than to sterilize anything that you're using. So, open crock dills take between 8 and 9 days generally sitting in the kitchen to be fully fermented. They are not meant to be put into jars and sealed and put away for the winter. They have to be eaten within a week to 3 weeks, assuming you're keeping the finished product in the refrigerator. Okay, so now we want to get this brine into the jug. And I have that a 1/4 inch to a ½ an inch from the top of the rim. And I mentioned that I put in extra water. Well, that's going to be reserved for a future need, if there is a need. There's a little bit of salt there. There we go. So I'll set this away in the fridge later on. So earlier I cut a J cloth in half. I have it immersed in vinegar so that it's purified. We're going to, or sterilized, we're going to cover the mouth of the jug with the J cloth to make sure no fruit flies or any other type of insect gets into it and could possibly spoil it. So I have rinsed the J cloth thoroughly so there's no vinegar residue. We just cover that up, and we have an elastic close by. Which is all very fine. However, I like to trim off the excess so I'll be able to see what's happening in the fermentation process as the days go by this coming week. So this is the finished product, and the only thing left to do is to set it on plate such as the one I just used, because what will happen during the fermentation process is there'll be foam that comes up into the J cloth. Some of excess moisture will run down into the plate. Normally what happens is within 36 hours you will see clouding take place, and that's the fermentation process. And in the 4th or 5th day, probably the 5th would be better, take off the cloth, check to see whether the water level is still close to the rim. If not, that's when the reserved water becomes useful. You just top it up. Now, on the 8th or 9th day, depending upon the temperature in your kitchen or wherever you have left the cucumbers, I don't worry about the daylight. I don't have direct sunlight on it at any time. So on the 8th or 9th day, when you decide to take off the J cloth, what you're going to discover is either a thick coating of white mold, white gray mold, or it will just look heavily cloudy. But generally there's mold there. Not to worry, that is all part of the fermentation process. And you just skim it off and test your dill pickle, and if it's crunchy, you know that everything is fine. The flavor, well, the flavor will carry you away. It is invariably delicious. So let's assume now that the jug that I just finished has gone through its 8 to 9 days of fermentation, and they are absolutely at the perfect point to be eaten. So what I do is I take all of the dill pickles out, I put them into a large plastic container that will fit into the fridge, and then that halts the fermentation process, and you have 2 to 3 weeks, if not a little bit longer, during which you can have 1 or 2 of these a day. I share them with other people, so they generally don't last too long. The last batch I don't share quite as well. But just to show you, these dills are sitting in their brine. There's no need to rinse them or anything. It's a very, very healthy brine. And there's crunch. So these have been in the fridge for 2 weeks, and there's still lots of crunch in them. There are some people who, when they finished eating all the dills, they'll keep the brine because it is full of the same probiotics as you're hoping to get from the dill, and they have a spoonful of that every day. And all of this keeps the digestive tract very, very healthy.
What about the garlic?
When you decant, if I may use that word, when you take the dill pickles from the jug into your plastic container, don't discard the garlic. Keep the garlic in it because it is also very delicious. Now, I may not have mentioned why I personally feel that dill pickles, naturally fermented dill pickles, are so important. It's because of the health benefits for the digestive tract. Most recent scientific studies, medical scientific studies, show that about 75% of your immune system is determined by the health of your digestive tract. And the naturally found probiotics in naturally fermented dill pickles, as in naturally fermented sauerkraut, provide all the probiotics that you need. And I wish you well. It is not a hard process, it's fun to do, and it's very rewarding. I have, in all the years that I've been making dill pickles, when I've offered any to someone who's never tasted this type of dill pickle, there has never been a negative response. I wish you the best.